In the late 1970s, the Soviet Union looked unbreakable. From the outside, it was a superpower carved in steel and ideology missiles in silos. Tanks rolling through Red Square, flags fluttering from Berlin to Vladivostok. Its leaders spoke in the language of inevitability. History, they said, was on their side. But beneath the concrete and slogans, something fragile was taking shape. Not a rebellion, not a coup, not even an enemy army. It was oil. Deep beneath the frozen plains of Siberia, the Soviet Union had struck what appeared to be a miracle-vast oceans of crude, enough to fuel factories, armies, and an empire. At a moment when the global economy was convulsing from energy shocks, this resource seemed to grant Moscow a new lease on power. Oil dollars began to pour in, and slowly, quietly, the Soviet system changed. Planners stopped worrying about efficiency. Ministries stopped asking hard questions. Entire sectors of the economy were kept alive, not because they worked, but because oil money allowed them to exist. The Soviet Union did not reform, it substituted. Instead of fixing broken factories, it sold oil. Instead of modernizing agriculture, it imported food. Instead of innovation, it bought time. And for a while, it worked. The 1970s became the illusion decade one, where collapse was postponed, not prevented. One where oil masked structural rot, one where leaders mistook temporary relief for permanent stability. But addiction has a price. Oil does not care about ideology. Markets do not respect five-year plans, and empires built on a single resource rarely survive when the price collapses. By the time Soviet leaders realized what oil had done to them, it was too late. The wells were still pumping, but the system was already bleeding. This is not the story of how the Soviet Union ran out of oil. It is the story of how oil ran the Soviet Union and destroyed it from the inside. By the early 1970s, the Soviet Union stood at a crossroads it refused to acknowledge. Its economic model, central planning, rigid quotas, political obedience had already begun to stall. Factories met targets on paper but produced goods nobody wanted. Farms consumed vast resources yet failed to feed the population. Innovation lagged decades behind the West. The system needed reform, but reform was dangerous. Real reform meant decentralizing power. It meant allowing failure. It meant admitting that Marxist economics, as practiced, was no longer working. So the leadership chose the safer path: oil. The discovery and rapid expansion of Siberian oil fields gave the Soviet state something it had never truly possessed before: a near-limitless stream of hard currency. As global oil prices surged after the 1973 energy crisis, Moscow suddenly found itself earning billions of dollars without changing anything at home. This changed everything. Oil revenue became a substitute for reform. Instead of fixing inefficient factories, the state kept them running with subsidies. Instead of modernizing agriculture, it imported grain from the Westphal from its ideological enemies. Instead of encouraging productivity, it preserved employment to maintain political stability. The Soviet economy did not evolve. It froze. Oil money allowed leaders to delay painful decisions year after year. The illusion of strength grew stronger. Living standards stopped collapsing. Shelves became slightly fuller. The system appeared to function again. But beneath the surface, dependency deepened. Entire ministries were reorganized around energy exports. Infrastructure, transport, and planning priorities shifted toward oil and gas. Other sectors, technology, consumer goods, services atrophied. The Soviet Union was becoming a petrostate without admitting it. And like all petrostates, it began to lose its internal discipline. When money arrives easily, waste becomes invisible. Corruption spreads quietly. Accountability dissolves. Productivity no longer matters. Only access to the resource does. Oil insulated the Soviet elite from reality. Warnings from economists were ignored. Reports highlighting inefficiency were buried. As long as oil dollars flowed, the system could pretend it was stable. But oil is not stability. It is volatility disguised as strength. And the Soviet Union had just bet its entire future on a commodity it did not control. Oil did not merely support the Soviet economy. It quietly rewired it. As energy exports grew, the Soviet Union began to resemble a classic petrostate economy, dangerously dependent on a single source of revenue. This dependence distorted incentives at every level of the system. Why innovate when oil paid the bills? Why reform factories when exports covered the losses? Why tolerate political risk when stability could be purchased with subsidies? Productivity stopped mattering. In a healthy economy, failure forces adaptation. In the Soviet oil economy, failure was absorbed. Inefficient enterprises were kept alive not because they worked, but because shutting them down threatened social unrest. Wages were paid whether goods were useful or not. Output targets were met through accounting tricks rather than real value. Oil money masked decline. It also poisoned economic planning. Central planners became obsessed with maintaining export volumes rather than improving domestic performance. Investment flowed into pipelines, refineries, and export terminals while machine tools rusted, housing deteriorated, and consumer industries stagnated. The result was a hollow economy. The Soviet Union exported raw materials and imported finished goods. It sold oil to buy grain, technology, and even basic consumer items. This was the opposite of what a superpower should have been doing. Worse still, oil dependency made the system fragile. Unlike manufactured goods, oil prices were not controlled in Moscow. They rose and fell according to global forces' OPEC decisions, Middle Eastern wars, Western demand cycles. Every fluctuation sent shockwaves through the Soviet budget. During high-price years, the illusion of strength returned. During downturns, panic followed. Instead of building reserves or diversifying, the leadership spent aggressively during boom years, assuming prices would remain high. Social obligations expanded. Military spending remained enormous. The state locked itself into commitments it could not easily reverse. Oil wealth also bred complacency among the elite. Promotions depended less on competence and more on loyalty. Corruption flourished within energy ministries. Access to export revenues became a source of power, privilege, and secrecy. Information flowed upward, filtered, and sanitized. Bad news stopped reaching the top. The Soviet leadership believed it had solved its economic problems. In reality, it had postponed them and magnified their consequences. The petrostate trap is simple and unforgiving. When a system relies on easy money, it forgets how to function without it. And the Soviet Union was about to learn this lesson the hard way. For years, oil had acted as a cushion beneath the Soviet economy. Then, in the mid-1980s, it vanished. Global oil markets shifted rapidly. New production flooded in from outside OPEC. Energy conservation reduced Western demand. Saudi Arabia opened the taps to regain market share. Prices collapsed, falling by more than half in just a few years. For the Soviet Union, the timing was catastrophic. Oil and gas exports had become the backbone of state revenue. When prices plunged, hard currency earnings collapsed with them. The money that paid for imported food, technology, and debt service simply stopped arriving. The illusion dissolved almost overnight. Budgets imploded. The government could no longer subsidize failing industries at previous levels. Imports were slashed, store shelves emptied, factories stalled as spare parts became unavailable. Even the military felt the strain. This was not a normal recession. It was a systemic shock to an economy that had forgotten how to adapt. Unlike market economies, the Soviet system had no built-in adjustment mechanisms. Prices were fixed. Enterprises could not pivot. Workers could not move freely. When money disappeared, everything froze. The leadership panicked. Emergency borrowing increased dependence on Western lenders. Gold reserves were quietly sold to cover immediate obligations. Short-term fixes replaced long-term planning. Every solution deepened the crisis. Oil had not only funded the system, it had hidden its rot. Once the oil money disappeared, decades of inefficiency surfaced all at once. Infrastructure collapsed under neglect. Agricultural failures could no longer be covered by imports. Regional disparities exploded into political resentment. For the first time, the Soviet Union faced scarcity without a financial buffer. And the population noticed. Living standards fell sharply. Long lines returned. Trust in the state eroded. The social contract obedience in exchange for stability was broken. Worse still, the leadership no longer controlled the narrative. The economic crisis coincided with a loosening of censorship. Citizens could see the gap between official claims and lived reality. They could compare themselves to the West and to each other. Oil had delayed the reckoning. The price collapse forced it. What followed was not merely economic decline, but political unraveling. Because once a system loses the ability to provide, it also loses the right to command. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in 1985, he inherited an economy already in freefall. The oil money was gone, the budget was bleeding, the system was exhausted. Yet for the first time in decades, the Soviet leadership openly admitted something was wrong. Gorbachev understood the core problem. The Soviet system could not survive unchanged. Productivity was collapsing. Technology lagged badly. Society was stagnating. Reform was unavoidable. But reform required resources, and the Soviet Union had none. This was the central tragedy of perestroika. Had reforms begun in the 1970s, when oil money was abundant, the state might have absorbed the shocks. Instead, oil wealth had delayed reform until the worst possible moment. Now, every change threatened to break what little stability remained. Gorbachev tried to walk an impossible line. He loosened central controls while keeping state ownership. He encouraged openness without allowing full market signals. He reduced repression without building replacement institutions. The result was confusion. Enterprises gained partial autonomy but no real incentives. Prices remained distorted. Supply chains collapsed as old commands vanished without new mechanisms to replace them. Productivity fell further, not because workers were lazy, but because the system no longer functioned. Meanwhile, oil prices remained low. The government lacked the hard currency to cushion the transition. Imports fell further. Shortages intensified. Inflation, long hidden by price controls, began to surface. Political openness glasnost made everything worse in the short term. For the first time, citizens could openly criticize the state. They learned the truth about economic failures, corruption, and past lies. Instead of rallying behind reform, trust evaporated. Republics began to question why they should remain inside a collapsing union. Nationalism surged as Moscow's authority weakened. Gorbachev was blamed from all sides. Reformers said he moved too slowly. Hardliners said he moved too fast. The population blamed him for falling living standards. But the deeper truth was harsher. Gorbachev was trying to fix a system that oil had already hollowed out, using tools that required money he no longer had. Reform without resources is not reform. It is exposure, and exposure is fatal to systems built on control. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was no longer collapsing slowly. It was unraveling all at once. The economy no longer generated enough value to sustain the state. Oil revenues, once the system's life support, remained weak. Industrial output fell. Tax collection disintegrated. Moscow could no longer reliably fund the army, subsidize republics, or maintain basic services. Power drained away from the center. Republics began withholding resources. Local leaders ignored central directives. What had once been a tightly controlled empire became a loose collection of regions acting in their own survival interests. Oil addiction had done its final damage. For decades, it had allowed the Soviet leadership to avoid reform, to silence warning signs, and to preserve a brittle system far beyond its natural lifespan. When the oil money vanished, there was no resilient economy underneath a lonely bureaucracy, dependency, and decay. The August 1991 coup attempt exposed the truth. Hardliners tried to seize control to restore order, but the state they hoped to save no longer functioned. The army hesitated, the public resisted. Authority evaporated in real time. Within months, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. This was not simply the failure of communism. It was the failure of substitution. Oil had substituted for reform. Revenue had substituted for productivity. Stability had substituted for legitimacy. And when the substitute disappeared, nothing remained to hold the system together. The deeper lesson is unsettling and timeless. A state can survive inefficiency for a long time if it has a single powerful source of income. But that income does not strengthen the system. It weakens it by hiding reality. Oil did not destroy the Soviet Union overnight. It delayed its collapse until it became unstoppable. When historians look back, they often focus on ideology, leadership mistakes, or political infighting. But beneath all of it lies a simpler, more dangerous truth. The Soviet Union collapsed because it mistook cash flow for strength. And when the flow stopped, the illusion died with it.